Thank you so much. Well, thank you for being here. Buonasera. Thank you. Mulțumesc. Those were the two Romanian words I know. I know a third one, which is noroc, but that's for later. All right. Thank you for being here, and I know it's a bit long. Just 15 minutes, I promise. So, growing up as a child of Chinese immigrants in a small town in Germany, let me see if this works. Oh my God. It vibrates. Is that normal? Is that the purpose of this clicker? Oh, there we are. Yes. So growing up as a child of Chinese immigrants in a small town in Germany, I often felt more like a stranger in the world, also within my family, actually. And later, I started to create spaces for those who feel maybe similarly for different reasons. And perhaps this is why my latest project on loneliness feels like one I've been working on my whole life already. And interestingly, the word loneliness only appeared in the English language in the 19th century. And before that, there was only the word oneliness. So the idea that all is one and one is all. Last year, the World Health Organization announced that loneliness is now a global public health crisis, with about 1 in 4 adults feeling lonely on a regular basis, and those below 30 years being the most affected age group. And the impact of loneliness ranges from mental health issues, such as anxiety and depression, but also goes along with a higher risk of cardiovascular diseases, dementia. It even can have a direct impact on the very span of our lives. So what is loneliness? The textbook definition describes it as the perceived state of having either not enough or not close enough social connections. But what I've learned in organizing community events in different cities in Europe, okay, in Europe, and also online with global participants from all around the world, is that loneliness comes in all different kinds of shapes and forms and flavors, and that makes it a uniquely shared experience. Or to say it with the words of Carl Rogers, a psychologist, what is most personal is also most universal. So when looking, So in understanding our shared loneliness, we can see that there's not only revealing a lack for connection, but it also reveals the kinds of forces that have shaped our society and the way that we live, at least if we look at the societies from most modern, Western, industrialized cultures and nations. And if we look a little bit more closely at those factors, whether they are technological or social or cultural, we can see how they've been driving us further apart from each other, but also further away from ourselves. And if we see a little bit even more closely, we can also see that there is now small but mighty signals that start to shift this paradigm. So one of the key forces is, of course, technology. And particularly social media, as Stanford professor Anna Lemke has said, has essentially drugified human connection. By that she means that we've developed this compulsive, addictive behavior of our phones, right, as a gateway towards that connection that we long for so deeply. And now with the rise of AI in the form of chatbots and AI companions, and now even as a wearable necklace, the question is, what will we do if we further commodify this connection, if connection must not actually be consumed? But now something interesting is happening, because we're seeing a slow and gradual shift towards reimagining our relationship towards technology. So this is a very recent survey that was done with more than 1,000 Gen Z adults, of which almost half of them say that they wish that these platforms like TikTok would have never been invented. And more than 80% have already taken steps to limit their social media usage at some point, which goes along with the trend of dumb phones rather than smartphones, and it goes along with the fact that less people go or stay on dating apps because they've been not doing what they promised us. So people find new, very creative ways to date offline, in real life, like this, imagine, like crazy. For example, in Spain, in a particular supermarket chain where you can now go at a particular hour, and if you put a pineapple turned upside down in your cart, that will be the sign to be like, you know, talk to me, maybe. I see you have a pineapple, I have a pineapple, we have something in common, so you can go ahead. And there's more and more spaces that are now offline and like phone-free events. And I think we also have like a zone here at the festival that is phone-free, which is awesome. This is a picture from the Offline Club, which started a couple of months ago in the Netherlands and completely took off with hosting events now in Europe and different kinds of cities where people go and they intentionally leave their phone, they lock it securely, and they disconnect in order to reconnect with themselves and with each other. Another main factor is, of course, our physical environments and the way that we've designed our cities much more for cars and commerce and convenience rather than for community. There's a rise in single households and less public space that is there for us to encounter each other. So what has happened is that we've not only physically but also emotionally isolated ourselves from each other as our individual islands, where we only choose those to be with who are a little bit more similar than others. And connected to that, there's an interesting neuroscientific research that suggests that the root cause of loneliness isn't connected to any tendency of us as humans of being antisocial, but the fact that we hold biases towards the other, that we think they are different and therefore we cannot connect, right? And that is a very dangerous thing, as Hannah Arendt already warned us about in 1951 in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, that was published after World War II, saying that when we become more isolated and more lonely, we also become more susceptible and vulnerable towards those who promise us an ideology and a false belonging. And this is exactly what we've been seeing the past few years here in Europe, but also in other countries and other regions around the world, with a rise of particularly far-right populism and leaders who are gathering people and speaking to the sense of loneliness, of not being seen, of being neglected. So how can we find a way to be together again and be with each other as neighbors and residents and citizens? One way, perhaps, are the citizen assemblies, which are gaining traction more and more. And these are groups, randomly selected groups of people, citizens and residents, that gather together to make decisions in a facilitated, long, messy process on policy solutions for topics like climate change, for example. There is also now more and more public space that is being reclaimed by citizens themselves or residents in order to make them car-free or green them. There's people coming together on long tables to have food with each other. There's people gathering in parks to sing and to dance. And even though these might sound like very small examples, they're exactly the kinds of shared spaces that we need in order to embrace our differences again, that make our shared humanity. And last but not least, let's talk about work. And the idea of workism, so finding your identity, your value, your self-worth in what you achieve professionally, how productive you are, how busy you are. In China, there's a term 996, 996, which speaks to this culture of busyness and toxic productivity, of working from 9 in the morning until 9 at night, 6 days a week. And even though this culture might still be celebrated in some environments and rewarded in some environments, the silent and quiet suffering has become less and less bearable, with staggering burnout rates, mental health issues generally, also the phenomenon of quiet quitting, and more people feeling lonely at work. And this is not only related to the fact that some of us are now working more remotely as well. So now there's also beginning a shift that has started maybe in 2020 as the Great Resignation. So there's still a reshuffling in the ways that we work, in the ways that we decenter work in our lives, and that we find a more balanced way in new work models, 4-day work weeks, portfolio careers, and ways that we not only find more flexibility, but also ways to find more equality in it. There's new economic models pioneered by countries like Bhutan, for example, with a gross national happiness index, which is an alternative to GDP in order to measure success not only by how much we produce and how much we consume, but how well we care for one another. So our shared loneliness right now reveals a mirror of the world that we've created that values separation over connection and individualism over relationships and community, and that ultimately glorifies the idea of independence and self-sufficiency rather than interdependence. But we have a chance to reconnect with a capacity that lies within each one of us, which is the capacity and the practice of care and compassion in order to flip this script. And the good news is we don't need an app for this. We don't need a lot of money to be invested or a lot of time, because we all innately have it already. And we just need to remember that and need to reconnect with this capacity and find a practice that works for each one of us. And we can start by reconnecting with ourselves. Reconnecting with ourselves first. So how can we start to care for ourselves first? Especially in the moments where it gets a little bit tricky, where we feel anxious or nervous or overwhelmed or lonely. How can we stay with ourselves rather than going on our phones and distract and numb or consume or work harder, just not to feel what is maybe inside of us? So some might call this, right, the practice of me time, and I like to think of it as playtime. So at our community gatherings, we always find a playful way of going inwards, of introspection. And yes, this might look like sitting down, going into a moment of stillness, taking a couple of deep breaths. But it might also be journaling, painting, or moving and embodying and feeling our bodies again so that we get outside of our busy minds. So if you're curious, and I've already seen some people writing these, you can try and make a little bit of space for play for you. If you write an unfinished letter, so you can find it here in the House of Ideas, I would love it. We'll pick some for the Sunday conversation as well. Because when we start to reconnect with ourselves and care for ourselves, we can also care for others and for each other. Perhaps by practicing how to really listen again. And I can tell that many of you are very much listening right now, but in so many moments, and I include myself in that, we're not really listening. So in the community gatherings, we always do a practice of one-on-one, where we give a prompt, such as, tell me about an experience where you have felt misunderstood, or lonely, or not seen and not heard. How did that make you feel? And the first person starts sharing, and the other person, the listener, simply listens. No interruptions, no comments, no advice, nothing has to be said also afterwards, right? Simply the act of witnessing the other person in their sharing. And what participants tell me over and over again is how precious this moment is for them, because it has become so rare for us to be listened to and to listen to someone else in a safe and non-judgmental space. So if you feel like doing that as well, or giving it a try, you can enter the Room of Whispers, which is the second very special installation that we created together. It's also in the House of Ideas. So once we reconnect and care for ourselves and each other, then we can also start to care and extend that care towards the world and all of life around us. Because nothing in nature exists or sustains by itself, including us. And we are not separate from it. We are a part of it. And when we understand that we are indeed a part of all of life, that we're truly interconnected and that we're interdependent, we can also realize that we're never truly alone. So perhaps we could get in touch with that practice of nurturing our environments, nurturing what is dear to us. And whether that is by reconnecting back with nature in a very small way, like watering your plants, paying attention to the bird songs, going out into the forests, or showing up and being of service in the communities that you're part of. Any of these practices might help us to nurture what is around us in order also to nurture what is within us. And then, perhaps, we might see loneliness not only as a crisis, which it is, but also as a chance for us to get back in touch with our capacity and practice of care and compassion, to reconnect with ourselves, with each other, and all of life around us. And then we might return from loneliness to oneliness again, to realize that we're not alone, but that we're actually all one. And perhaps that is the soft power of loneliness. Måltimesk, thank you very much. Thank you.